Hey everybody, there is room up front. And there's some room over here. It's getting sunny. Over here is going to be really good. You will be able to really see. But really, there's places up front. There will be a video of a famous person connecting through cyberspace, and that will be the only way you can see it. So that little screen right there. You will be able to hear it, we guarantee. Yeah, maybe we should give up the whole family idea. Sit wherever you feel like, Ann. We're giving up the whole family idea. Hey, ushers, you can stop ushering and come on up here and enjoy yourselves. The grandkids are the ushers, in case you're wondering. Here comes Leo and Gabriel and Andrea and Andrea's mother. I think you want to be over here. It's gonna. I'm sorry, Susan and Alex, who just flew in, and David and Linda and Claire. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Lord, I hope my picks don't fall off. Okay. Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, we will be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we will not be ashamed. To turn, it will be our delight, till by turning, turning, we come round right. And if you know it, sing it with me. Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, we will be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we will not be ashamed. To turn, it will be our delight, till by turning, turning, we come round right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm Wynn Grace. Dad called me his Huntsdale kid because I was born in Huntsdale when they lived on their first farm in Huntsdale after Mom had several miscarriages, very tough time, and then I came along and then they couldn't get the whole thing stopped. And Dad was a great lover of music. He did not see music as background. If he was listening to a CD, he was sitting there listening to it. And he was a great encourager of my music. And especially at the end of his life, he wanted to start singing. He never played himself. Leela, my daughters Leela and Ellie, and I were charged with doing the music for the celebration, and we used as our reference these lists written on Dad's standard yellow tablet paper, favorite songs and songs I like, and and they're complete with who is supposed to sing them. So that's why I just sang that one, because it was on here twice. But some of them we will not be singing, like Who Will Watch the Home Place, that he loved to hear Ellie sing, because we were afraid everybody would cry too much and you would all get dehydrated. So what's happening? Oh, hello. Yes. I want to introduce our longtime friend, family friend, and good friend of my sister Beth's, Reverend Paula Ritchie, who's going to help wrangle us.
On behalf of the entire Horner family, thank you for being here. And the family would like to extend their thanks to the Boone County History and Cultural Center for allowing us to be here today. There are a few housekeeping details. We ask that you would silence your phones, and if you need a restroom, go right out the back and turn, and you will find one. Again, there are places to get water or lemonade, and we don't want people passing out today. And following the service, there will be a reception inside in the art gallery. Earlier today, Dave's family gathered at the Columbia Cemetery with the Reverend Kim Ryan for a beautiful graveside service. His ashes were held in a delicate, biodegradable, handmade box designed and created for Mr. Horner by artist and family friend Victoria Smith. We're here this afternoon not for a funeral, nor even really a memorial service. Our purpose here today is simply to remember and celebrate the life of David Horner. And it was a good life. A life that influenced the lives of countless people with his intelligence, compassion, and common sense. He changed the world around him because he was willing to speak the truth with integrity and with humility. And David Horner changed this part of the world because he worked diligently for something we don't think about very much any often. He worked for the common good. Today, you will hear the stories of families and friends, and you will hear family and friends sing. There's a passage in the New Testament of the Bible that's called the roll call of saints. And so you get all this list of people, going on and on. And then it says, time is too short to talk about everything. And that struck me because time is too short to tell all the stories of David Horner. And we're going to try and do that today. But time really is too short. But the first remembrance will be from his colleague and longtime friend of the Horner family, David Sept.
Okay. A few days back, and Richard, it really wasn't very much advance notice. Where is he? Okay, I got you now. When you asked me if I would say a few words today, honestly, my first thought was, wow, I'm not sure I can do that and properly and do justice to this amazing man. And then I thought how much of a privilege it was to be asked, and I said yes. But I did demand one thing of Richard. I was not going to go last. And I think most of you know why. That's why I'm going first and Beth is going last, okay? Gathering my thoughts really did amazingly take me back a little over 60 years to when I first heard about David, and I didn't hear about him by name, but I heard about him as the man across the road that launched weather balloons in the middle of the night. I heard those remarks from my father, who had a business directly across the road. And the road I'm talking about now, at that time, was Highway 40, what we now loftily call Business Loop 70 West. The property where David was part of the U.S. Weather Bureau stationed at the old Columbia Airport, which is now part of Cosmo Park. So hopefully you can place that if you're local. The balloons launched from over there, and I do remember one of the first stories about him. Actually, he told me this many, many years later, not my father, although maybe that's why my father knew of weatherman David Horner. One of his launches was in a quite a windy morning storm that was coming through the area. And coupled with the fact that these weather balloons, if you've ever seen them, had a long tether on them with a radio package on the bottom, sending out messages. This particular one got launched at quite a velocity, horizontally, fairly horizontally. And if you've ever seen a bolo, for example, how they wrap around things, well, that instrument package wrapped around the power lines on the south side of Highway 40 and shut off all the power in the northwest part of Columbia, so, including my dad's business, which did have some refrigeration in it. So this is actually making me come up think that there were maybe more reasons than that he mentioned David Horner. It was almost 30 years later that I actually met David. Both of us were trailing along with our wives at a grad student's house party. Both of the wives were affiliated with the English department at the University of Missouri. And I remember meeting David and finally figuring out who he was. And I told him who my father was. Of course, that's what you did then. You had to identify your family, right? And that's when I knew, and I told him that I had heard about him as a weatherman, but that was about all the contact that we had that night. Those kinds of affairs, particularly at that time, I really wasn't particularly comfortable with them, but I know David was, because he loved everyone, and that kind of meeting, even though it was based on his wife's involvement with the university, he would have loved that. It was another 20 years before I really got to know Dave. Things actually converged and got to know not only David, but his amazing family. I was lucky enough then to be asked to serve on the board of the Columbia Cemetery Association with David. And I'm not going to tell Richard the details behind our first discussion about this, when I actually forgot for a while that David served on that board until I looked back. That's my fault, not his. But David and I actually overlapped for 6 years on that board. I've been on it now for, I think, 16. David was amazing in board meetings, and that's where I got to see some of his skills. He was very considerate of everybody. He also was very considerate and very knowledgeable about group dynamics. So he paid attention to how a good group could work together. And I remember the first significant issue that we took up was sort of a tricky personnel matter. It involved our superintendent's team that ran the cemetery, and the husband and wife who lived in the small house that we still have at the cemetery. And I remember David working with us on the board and with them to come up with a solution that was actually better than anything we had started out with. And I know that took a lot of behind the scenes contacts and talk, but that was what David did. And as a result, we ended up with the best combination, the best pair of superintendents team that we ever had. It was about that same time that David's wife, Winnie, was working with my wife at the time on the board of the Columbia Library Board. And they, plus some of the other women, decided that they should ask the spouses and to a dinner or to get together for a meal. And we did that, David and I, again, accompanying the women. That led to very frequent, wonderful gatherings that we came to call the Church of the Brunch. We met frequently and sometimes many, many weeks in a row on Sunday mornings for brunch. None of us liked to be there very early, but we still called it brunch. And we got to know each other much better at that time. Those early meetings were mostly in Columbia restaurants, particularly the old Boone Tavern. David loved those because he ran into a lot of old friends at Boone Tavern. There were a lot of the old timers would come to those brunches, and they were quite good. But what he really loved later was he suggested at one point that we go to Hartsburg to a place called Dottie's. And we did, and that became a very frequent stop for us. Those of us that typically were organizing things and calling restaurants and seeing if they could handle us became quite sensitive to the fact that we couldn't go too long without going to Dottie's. A few years later, the Washburns, part of that group, was suggested that we go to the, I'll call it the Little General out there at Midway, but maybe those of you locally know it best as the home of the Persia Creek Yacht Club. We even went out there, and again, at that point, David met up with friends this time that were north of I-70, whereas down at Ashland and down at Dottie's at Hartsburg, it was the people like the Beckmeyers and Louise Martin and others that would always come over and say hi to him. You know, he had, as has been mentioned, I think briefly, come back here with a family and bought a farm, and farming was his love. He also served as a Boone County Commissioner. And so for all these contacts, he knew everybody, not just in Columbia, but around the county. And it was those places that David really loved to frequent. Besides our cemetery work, David and I shared a real passion in local history. And the first time that and he helped me out a whole lot on those, because a lot of times what I like to do is to come up with a nugget of a story, a little known story, and research it and hopefully pass it on if it's interesting, pass it on to those people who are interested in the stories but not necessarily the big picture of history. One of the first ones of those was the time that I learned that Columbia had, of all things, something called a weather whistle. A weather whistle was a steam whistle that originated downtown Columbia now. This was way back. was later moved to the power plant on Business Loop 70 now on the east side when that plant was built. And the weather whistle was actually a coated short and long toots on the weather whistle that were tooted by the power plant employees to let everyone within earshot and who know the code. I mean, you had to have two things there, what the weather was for the day. And when I mentioned that, I first heard about that from my cousin, Jack Oliver, and I mentioned that to Dave. He said, oh, yeah, he says, and he started filling in the blanks because he was the weatherman that called the power plant each morning with the forecast and so that they could blow that weather whistle and inform as many people as possible about the upcoming weather. Pretty amazing. He even remembered some of the codes, and I just still can't believe that. Another one of those things that I got entranced with was on the cemetery board, whatever happened to the gates, some of the gates that we had at the cemetery. There used to be some beautiful gates at the cemetery. They're no longer there. So I did a bunch of research, and David was extremely helpful in that. I created a little booklet that I brilliantly titled Gate, Whatever Happened to the Beautiful Gates at Columbia Cemetery. And David was just amazing. Of course, I mean, you would expect that now with all of his experience with the cemetery, helping me fill in most of the blanks, except there's still one set I haven't located, and I'm still working on that part. I want to wrap up with a little more, to me, poignant favorite recent memory of David. I had the pleasure and privilege several times in the last couple of years to pick him up and take him back home after our brunches on Sunday morning. When we got, and by the way, where's Wynn? Wynn, that was only after I got permission from you and from Beth and from Richard and from David. Yeah, that's why I started with you. Because when the subject came up, there was this pause. Well, we've got to train him and be sure he knows how to help David get in and out of the car and to handle his wheelchair. That shows you the amazing, again, the amazing family that Dave spawned and that continues to support him. But on those days when I had permission, I would take David back home after brunch and help him get into his front room there in his easy chair at Tiger Place and ask him what he was going to do for the afternoon. And he would typically say, well, I'm going to push my recliner back, I'm going to read the Sunday paper and do the crossword, and I'll probably take a nap. And I said, well, that's exactly what I'm planning to do. We exchanged that little, had that little exchange quite a number of times, and so we enjoyed it, and that's one of my favorite memories of David. Just finishing, we all should know that the good don't always die young. And David Horner did so much good in his 101 years that the rest of us can only hope to do part of that. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave's number 2 grandkid, Ellie Grace, and my beloved sister is streaming in from Portland, Oregon. Check the screen up here if you can.
I'm here with Dave's youngest great-grandchild, as far as we know, unless there are any announcements.
Any announcements? Cousins?
This is Afton. This is his oldest grandchild, great-grandchild, Arizona, and his oldest grandson-in-law, Sept. And Afton is very tired. She waited a long time to see you all. Say hello. All right. You're going to go with your cat. I just wanted to say that we all so much wish that we could be there. We are sending love to everyone there and sharing all the wonderful memories. I was lucky enough to have 45 years with, we called him Dada, much to especially our grandmother's chagrin, who enforced the later grandchildren calling them Mama Win and Dada Dave. But they were in their mid-50s when I was born, so Ellie and I got some amazing memories, spending the night, bouncing tennis balls up and down the stairs at their Glenwood house, and just it was just an amazing childhood. And Dada liked to get Ellie and I to help him herd the cows. So imagine two little kids out in the field as going, like waving our arms as the cows ran towards us. They generally turned, so that was good. He had a lot of faith in us. But the song that we're going to share, Ellie and I are going to attempt to sing it together via a video coming in there, and Ellie's going to sing live for you all. And those of you on the live stream will just see me. This is a song that Ellie and I wrote together 11 years ago when we all gathered outside of Columbia to celebrate Dada's 90th birthday. And so at the time, we wrote the song called Solid Ground, or we also called it You've Lived a Long Life. And he already had at that point, and we're so glad we got another 11 years even after this song. I love you all, and here is Solid Ground.
And this is in the program, so we invite you to sing along on the chorus.
One, two, three. Clouds rolling and the rusty weather vane is spinning to the east, and it looks like rain. Nothing stays the same. Sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's pain. You've lived a long life with a kind heart and a love of this land. All the animals, all the babies, you've held with two strong hands. You've lived a good life in this crazy world, all the stories you can tell. You're the solid ground that we grow from, deep water in the well. You've lived a long life with a kind heart and a love of this land. All the animals, all the babies, you've held with two strong hands. You've lived a good life in this crazy world, all the stories you can tell. You're the solid ground that we grow from, deep water in the well. Dusty gravel road, heading out of
years roll back and we're home place bound. On this fertile ground, the seeds you planted growing all around. You've lived a long life with a kind heart and a love of this land. All the animals, all the babies you've held with two strong hands. You've lived a good life in this crazy world. You're the stories you can tell. You're the solid ground that we grow from, deep water in the well. You're the solid ground that we grow from, deep water in the well.
And Leila and I both deeply feel that we are who we are because of him. He is our solid ground.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you, Ellie. And I will read some of this because I'm not so great at speaking, but I'm real good at writing. And my mom taught me to read before I started first grade, so I'm pretty good at reading it. I want to say hi to everybody. Thank you all for coming out. And so many people on the live stream there. They're tuning in from Connecticut and California and Germany, Florida. So many friends and family that are with us here today. Thank you all. And so I just want to start out by saying that I'm Richard Horner, and I'm a lucky boy. I think anybody who knew David or Dave, as many of you knew him, would have to agree. There's so many wonderful things that can be said about my dad that I feel like I've got to bring a little levity to the situation by telling a story that he told on himself more than once, demonstrating one of his greatest qualities, which was humility. It's a farm story from the mid-1950s. Shortly after we moved on to Sugar Grove Farm, southeast of Columbia, we had a long stretch of fence with Dorsey Bass that ran along the entire length of the south end of the farm. And Dorsey's half of the fence was pretty good in those days. Dad's half was not the best for the first several years after we moved into our place, and Dorsey let him know about it. Dad didn't have the time or the money to immediately undertake the fundamental repairs that were required to rebuild that long stretch of fence. There were other more pressing matters to deal with than fence repair. There always are other more pressing matters than fence repairs until somehow they become pressing. In the field toward the western end of the fence that my dad was responsible for, there was a weak spot that one ordinary old shorthorn cow would use to get over into the Bass's place on a regular basis. One evening, while he was sitting down to eat supper with his growing family, Dorsey called Dad up and told him his cow was grazing her way up on the fence and around his little office building, which sat near the edge of the field. When Dad came over to round up his cow, he listened carefully to Dorsey's admonitions. "Horner," Dorsey said, barely looking up from his desk, "that's a lousy stretch of fence you've got on the west end. That old shorthorn cow of yours comes over about 6 o'clock every evening." "Okay, Dorsey, you bet. I can see you're occupied. Don't worry, I'll deal with it tomorrow," Dad replied. He had a bigger problem on the other side of the farm where cattle were getting out on the road, which is dangerous for cows and drivers alike. Dad got the old shorthorn cow back through the compromised fence that evening, and the next one, too, when he undertook a hasty repair of the breach. As he stretches some barbed wire loosely over the biggest hole, he distinctly recalls the old cow turning her head around to stare at him fixedly, saying without saying, "You go right ahead and do your patchwork. I'll deal with that sorry repair job tomorrow." Well, it wasn't more than a few days later when David Reamer stopped by to see Dorsey and leaned out the side door of Dorsey's office to jettison a stream of tobacco juice into the nearby pasture. There, no more than 10 yards away, was an old shorthorn cow grazing her way up around Dorsey's small office building. "Dorsey, what's that cow doing up here by the office?" Reamer asked. Dorsey Bass looked down at his watch and answered back without much hesitation. "That's Horner's cow. Looks like she's about 10 minutes early this evening." So they were friends for years. in Columbia and all around, particularly at the Bullpen Cafe. Weimer enjoyed that line immensely and repeated it over and over at the Bullpen Cafe at Dad's expense. Dad loved the Bullpen. I think when he closed was the first time we thought we'd lose him as he grieved. Not really, of course, but in 2014, when my mom passed away at the young age of 92, we didn't know how Dad would react. But after a while, he recovered and gave us 8.5 wonderful more years. So many people become ordinary or bitter with age. Others are struck with disabling dementia, and some just don't seem to care about anything or anybody else anymore. Dad was just the opposite. He grew kinder, gentler, and more loving as he aged. If that's even possible for a man who was that way his whole life. It wasn't just us family members, but everybody he came into contact with who received a dose of real warmth, a beautiful, heartfelt interest in them and their lives, and his sympathy when they were hurt. It was truly amazing and a gift to all around him. Sorry, I'm going to be tearing up here. I don't know what's happening here. When Dad died, as the person sending out the emails to friends and family in Boone County and all over the world with the sad news, I received back a lot of testimonies of the positive effect he'd had on so many lives, from Dad's nephews and nieces and friends, and so many acquaintances from all walks of life, and people from all around the country, and wonderful friends and family that had the joy of meeting my father. Paul Wibemeyer, his partner in farming during the disastrous 1980s, wrote simply, "Not unexpected news at this point, but even so we are overwhelmed with sadness. Truly the best person I've ever known." And Cousin Carter, hey Carter, hope you're out there, sent words that echo my own sentiments as I read. "Your dad has lived a life that if it were a suitcase, it would have already burst open long ago by the wonderful moments that he crammed into it. As a young boy up till now, I've always marveled at the gentleness and kindness that radiated from his presence. During my times with him, I felt his eyes told me he understood who I was, calmly set aside the BS, and kept the good stuff. I wish I could master that myself." Thank you, Carter. And so true. Some of you know maybe I wasn't always the boy wearing a white hat. I may have even been a candidate for black sheep a time or two, but the amazing thing about Dad is that I never felt the negative side of the father-son relationship that so many people I've known have suffered through. One of his greatest qualities was the ability to communicate that he was there for you, no matter where you went. And he often did it when choosing to be silent. More than once, he admonished me, if you don't have something good to say, don't say anything at all. It's just so true what his granddaughter Leela contributed to the obituary, in which is printed in the program. He lived a good life and a long life, but for those who know and loved him, 101 years were not nearly enough. And I really am a lucky boy.
It's like up my nose. Okay, all right. Good afternoon. My name's Maggie Nardi. It was actually Maggie Horner many years ago. I fall into the category of cousin, I think. I'm not exactly sure what level, but at any rate, that's where I stand at this point. Uncle Dave and I were born on the same day, 40 years apart. June 21st, summer solstice, the day that the astrological signs of Cancer and Gemini collide. And we were an embodiment of that. I can't stay in one place, one country for more than 2 or 3 years, and I leave and hope nobody notices that I've gone. And then you have Dave, who has roots so deep and has left such a legacy that he's impacted everybody in this community. And as the years went by, I was drawn to that more and more, and no matter where I was in the world, I would look forward to coming back to Central Missouri for at least a few days, if not a week, every summer. And I would try to time it so that I could spend our birthdays together, partly because I wanted to focus on his and not mine, which was much more of a celebration. And thankfully, this June, I was able to come back for that, so I was really pleased. Now, we had to figure out some way to mark this momentous occasion. It was 101 years, not just 100, but 101. But there was such an amazing party last year, there was no way we could replicate that, so we were settling for lunch somewhere. But even that was a challenge, because where do you go? The Church of the Brunch Group has gone to all of the lovely places in town. Where is somewhere new? So we couldn't think of anything sort of nearby, so we decided to go further afield to Jefferson City, which apparently was off limits, I understand, years ago, because they were sort of the other. So Dave agreed, because he said, there's a bronze statue there of Lewis and Clark and their team. It's down on the banks of the mighty Mississippi. I would really like to go see it. Missouri, sorry. Mississippi rolls off the tongue better. Mighty Missouri. So he was game. So we got into, it was son Richard, grandson Wesley, and Dave and I piled into his old van, the one he couldn't drive anymore, but he could gaze at lovingly out the window of his apartment at Tiger Place for the last few years. And we drove to Jeff City and got up on the main drag and went into this restaurant, lovely old building. And there were only two other patrons there, one of which was leaving. And in the back of the restaurant, there was a group with balloons up in the air, birthday balloons, and one of them said 95. I was like, what? How can you have a 95-year-old and a 101-year-old in the same restaurant in Jeff City on the same day? It was incredible. And it was a woman. So I was thinking, well, maybe we could fix them up. And then we could say that Dave is dating a younger woman at 95. But we know she could not have kept up with him, and he likes women that are a few decades younger, like Patty. So after that, we had to go and try to find this statue, which was down on the Missouri, on the banks for sure, but also close to the Capitol, which is difficult since that is up on a hill. So where could it be located? So we got back in the van and we drove down the one street we could find that went down to the Missouri, and that was more of an industrial area, so that couldn't be it. So then we came back up, we were scratching our heads, and called the wise man of the Church of the Brunch Group, Dave, and asked him, where could this thing be? And so he gave us some more suggestions. We kept looking. We finally gave up and decided we had to get out and hoof it and find it on foot. Now, it was at least 100 degrees and 100% humidity. And you know it's hill. It's not like it's flat. And Dave gamely got out of the van and started marching with us. And Wesley was the one who found it, sort of peering through the bushes, glinting in the sun. There was this statue, nowhere near the banks of the Missouri, up high by the Capitol. And so we made our way around it, and it didn't look anything like he remembered, and it was not where it was supposed to be. But it did have a little fake waterfall there, so there was some water involved, and it was a lovely statue. But the main thing was that we triumphed over the temperatures and over memory, and like other things in life, I think it's the journey that counts, not necessarily the end result. And so that's a very special memory that I'll always keep that we had. But my dad had a much longer relationship with Uncle Dave. My dad is Frederick Neil Horner. He's the oldest son of Fred Horner, who is Dave's oldest brother. He was also the only child of Fred and Virginia, Fred's first wife. And he had a pretty tough childhood. He was shifted around between parents. His mom decided she didn't like mothering too much and sent him to live with his dad, but it was World War II, and his father was a Navy captain who was then shipped out. So he spent summers with his grandparents, and that's where he spent a lot of time with Dave, who really took him under his wing and like a big brother. So my dad had a stroke 7 years ago and is paralyzed on the left side, so he couldn't come here, but he did share some memories that I will read. His partner, Lois, lovingly transcribe them, and I will try to do him honor by reading them right now. So, I first met Uncle Dave on July 9, 1936, the day I was born. It's a Horner tradition that every newborn must be checked for 10 fingers and 10 toes immediately after birth. Dad was the manager of event, and Uncle Dave was the technician. And that was the beginning of the relationship with a young man I call my big brother. Some of my fondest memories of Uncle Dave are at the Ozarks at the family home Water Oaks. To a frightened little boy, he was so brave. In the dark with creatures running through the leaves, he would take me by the hand to the outhouse and patiently wait outside the door, then lead me back to my bed. He was kind and gentle. He was my hero. At one point, Uncle Dave was in charge of validating the diving skills of all the cousins. When it was my turn, Uncle Dave called, "My little buddy, it's your turn." I climbed to the top of a boulder above the Merrimack River and followed Uncle Dave's instructions to get ready for the dive. He counted to 3 and then said, "Dive." I was frozen with fear and eventually just jumped. Dave jumped in from the dock to fetch me. He didn't scold me, just patted me on the back in that special way he had of accepting and letting you know it was all okay. We got to the top of the ridge by the cabins, and to my surprise, there was a big animal waiting for us. Pet, Uncle Dave's favorite horse. This was my next challenge. Uncle Dave noticed my apprehension. He gently lifted me onto Pet's back and told me to hold on, which I did with trembling hands. As the horse looked over her shoulder with concern, Uncle Dave managed to calm us both down. He stroked Pet's mane while rubbing my back oh so gently. Uncle Dave led us a few steps forward and said in his supportive way, "Good job, Neil." I wonder if Uncle Dave is exercising Pet right now. A much later memory from Water Oaks is when I first took Lois up there to meet more of the Horners. As soon as we pulled up to the big cabin, the screen door opened and Uncle Dave came bursting out. He made a beeline for Lois, gave her a big hug, and said, "Welcome to Water Oaks." Always the caring, welcoming man with the big smile. The other place that stands out in my memories is the farm. I was a city kid, and Uncle Dave opened up a whole new world of animals and responsibility. We began the day with one of Aunt Wynn's hearty breakfasts, bacon, eggs, and hash browns. Then it was the morning routine of caring for the animals. First stop was the barn. The cows were not nearly as forbidding as Pet. Uncle Dave pulled over a stool and beckoned me to sit. The next thing I knew, my hands were on the udder and Uncle Dave's big hands covering mine. Together we began to milk the cow. I laughed as he redirected the milk onto the little kittens who were standing by. They mewed with joy. The morning had just begun, and Dave gave me the pail with the slop from breakfast, which I carried to the pig feeding trough, where I was greeted by a group of squealing pigs, and I had made dozens of new friends. This adventure was just another one that Uncle Dave helped me to experience. It was a long, fun day, but there was one event remaining. I had a feeling this was the day I got to drive the tractor. We drove over to where the tractor was located. Attached to it was a cart full of corn. When Uncle Dave pointed me towards the driver's seat, I knew my dream had come true. After showing me how to turn on the motor and put it into first gear, he stepped down and stood in front of the tractor. He told me to turn on the motor, put it in first, just let it go, make sure it was directed at him, and absolutely not to touch anything. So it moved slightly ahead with a jerk. I did exactly as he had instructed, even when the cartwheel was going off the road, tipping over and dumping all the corn into a ditch. I did absolutely nothing. After half an hour of putting all the corn back in the cart, he still had not scolded me. He put his hand on my back and said, "I'll take it from here." Classic Uncle Dave, patient and understanding. As the years went by, I looked forward to our phone calls, which had to substitute for visits. I was better able to appreciate Uncle Dave's wisdom, knowledge of the family, and ability to laugh and enjoy life. Uncle Dave, you are a wonderful mentor and inspiration. Love, Neil, your little buddy. I'm going to plug it in.
Joining us for this one is Dada's grandniece, Kelly Bosworth, here from Portland, Oregon. This is another song that was on Dada's list. It's called Crossing the Water.
And the words are in your program, so you're going to have to sing along. That's what Dad loved, so it's required.
It's required.
You don't have to get the words right.
And one of the last times I talked to him as he was passing on, he said he didn't learn until a mature age to stop worrying about looking stupid. And he realized that was a gift you could give other people, was to not worry about looking stupid. And then they could not worry about looking stupid. So what I'm saying is, don't worry about looking or sounding stupid, just sing. You can do it now before you're 95. I'm going to sing the chorus once so you can hear how it goes. The lyrics are in the program, and then we'll sing it again, and you can join in, and it'll go on from there. And we are crossing the water our whole life through. We are making a passage that is straight and true. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. Sing it with me, here we go. And we are crossing the water our whole life through. We are making a passage that is straight and true. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. You didn't sound stupid at all. For there is no shallow water, if not but love to keep us safely from the dangers and the devils of the deep. If with every breath within us we search forevermore to find some peaceful harbor on that far off shore. And we are crossing the water our whole life through. We are making a passage that is straight and true. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. For some it is a glory, for some it is a game, for some it is a story filled with emptiness and pain. But as rising winds in chorus, we search for steady ground. There is only that before us, there can be no turning round. And we are crossing the water our whole life through. We are making a passage that is straight and true. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. For there is no other journey that will ever be the same. No second chance horizon that will call you by your name. When the welling waves wash o'er you and stormy winds they drive, give your heart a song, sing it loud and long, keep your dreams alive. And we are crossing the water our whole life through. We are making a passage that is straight and true. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. Every heart is a vessel, and every dream is a light shining through the darkness of the blackest night. Yeah, Maya. Thank you.
I've been behind the corner there and I didn't see everybody. Hi. Hi, my name is Beth Horner, and I'm one of Dave's daughters. And I just have to reveal that before any major event in Dad's life, he would say these words: "I will be the only one allowed to speak." And that was the case at his 90th birthday, and the case at his 95th birthday, and the case at his 100th birthday, before Maggie spontaneously leapt up. At any rate, so now we get to speak. So I'm going to just give you some snapshots of what it was like to have Dad as a father and some of the stories that he told me. One night, I got a call from my father. I looked on my cell phone. Oh, wow, Dad's calling. Our nightly check-in. We checked in every night, and every night Dad would have his yellow pad at his table where he would jot it down what he wanted to talk to me about, what he wanted to say. And so I said, Dad, usually I initiated the call, but he had initiated the call. So I said, oh, Dad, how are you doing? Well, Beth, I'll tell you what, here's first on my list. I'm raging. Well, it's kind of uncharacteristic for Dad, but not uncharacteristic that he said it so calmly. I'm raging. So I said, well, okay, about this rage. He said, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Then he said, Beth, look that up on your magical device. So I put my cell phone on speakerphone, and I looked it up, and I said, well, Dad, that's a poem by Dylan Thomas. By the way, Dad loved poetry, and you would never know when he would just come out with a couple of words. There might be a storm, and he would just say, a thunderstorm, he said, of course, and gently toppled off his horse. From A.A. Milne. And then, of course, he would give you the Latin root of one or two of the words in the poem and how they got to be where they were in English. So, at any rate, I said, Dad, that was written by Dylan Thomas in 1959 for his aging father. And he said, well, I like that guy. I like him a lot. And so I said, you know, Dad, I'm always up for a good rage. Always. But tonight, could you tell me specifically what we're raging about? Or, to be correct, as my mother would want me to be, about which we are raging. And he said, I don't like the idea that I might get old. Now, given that he had just celebrated his 96th birthday, I thought maybe that horse had left the barn. But then he went on, and besides that, I don't want to sell any of my cows. This is a good herd, and I know I just had a stroke. I'll come back from it. I know I'm getting older, and it's prudent, but I don't want to sell my cows. In 1926, in St. Louis, Missouri, my dad opened a picture book that had been given to him for his 5th birthday, and his heart was captured by one of the illustrations. A young boy standing in a green, idyllic field, gazing longingly and lovingly at a contented cow. And underneath that illustration were written these words: the Guernsey cow, all brown and white, I love my cow with all my might. He was smitten. And so began a path. When he graduated from high school at age was 15 or 16, a pudgy 5'3" tall guy, teenager, he was allowed by his parents to spend 1 year before going back to college and being reasonable, 1 year at Water Oaks, which is where his family, and my mom's family too, because you know they met when they were 3 and 4 years old, where they had spent their summers down in the Ozarks. He was allowed to go there and work with Andy Wallace, who is the farmer on the land, to learn about farming. And so it was that every single morning, this pudgy 5'3" boy would leave an uninsulated summer cabin. No need to turn off the lights because there was no electricity. There was no heat except for a fireplace. He said, I don't think I changed my long johns for about 6 months. There was no running water. He had no vehicle, and there was no telephone. And each morning, a little before dawn, taking a lantern, which swung as he walked through the woods, down a ridge, across a little creek, up another ridge to work with Andy Wallace. But one morning when he got there, Andy Wallace was in bed and he was sick. And he said, Dave, you're going to have to take my place at the threshing today. You got to hook up the team and go to the threshing. He said, community is important. Somebody has to go and I can't go. Now, Dad had to put the team together. I don't know anybody here who's driven a team. I bet some people have. A team of horses, right? Okay. Well, we've all seen those old John Ford black and white movies with multiple teams of horses, with a stagecoach running away from the bad guys, all the horses cooperating. Well, let me tell you something, what it's like to be a member of a team of horses. You can try it. Bind yourself to your best friend. Try to make it across the room. I guarantee halfway across the room, you're going to have a falling out. Definitely. But Dad, he hooked them up. Now, I asked him once, can you take me through the process? And he did, but I'm just going to give you the short version. What's involved? There's the single tree, the double tree, the collar, the bridle, the hame, the clevis. Anne was given a clevis by Dad one night. There is the tongue. There is, well, anyway, there's so much more you have to put together. And he finally, this teenage boy, made it from the city, made it, and he guided his horse to the community threshing. He told me later, the minute he got there, everybody looked at him and looked down. Clearly, he wouldn't know what he was doing. He looked like he was from the city, and he might even be dangerous. So, but he was given a job, he said, and his job was to get water from the creek all day to feed to the steam engine. Now, when you think of threshing, think thrashing, okay? The threshing machine was a big, huge machine that sat in the middle of the field and thrashed the wheat from the chaff. People fed wheat into it, and it was powered by means of a long belt that went to a steam engine. Dad's job was to go back and forth all day from the creek back to the steam engine and to sidle up these two skittish, nervous, 2,000-pound horses, or could be a little less, maybe 1,500 pound, up to this steam engine like this. He said he went back and forth and had to be very careful. Okay now, Biddy. Oh, okay, Bess. Yeah, a little to your left. No, don't pay any attention. He said, in the same way, I think that he taught me how to drive. Okay, sugar lump. Okay, back up. Whoa, no, not that far. That's good. A little slower, back and forth. And all day he went back. He said at the end of the day, not one person had spoken to him. But as he went to leave, this old guy came over, looked at him, spat on the ground, and said, "Boy, you done good." By the end of that year, my father had grown to 6 feet 1 inch. That was the beginning of the life we know. A lot of people don't know that actually my dad had a pretty mischievous sense of humor. It was pretty mischievous. And he liked, for example, to play April Fool pranks on my mother. He one year, I'll never forget this. Well, actually, one Christmas Eve, I'll never forget this. He said, after Mom had filled all the stockings, gone to bed, he said, Would you like to help me fill your mother's stocking? I said, okay. Pantyhose were a new thing. So I came downstairs, and he had tacked a pair of pantyhose to the archway over the living room. He had purchased for her a set of coffee mugs and a metal plate that had the address of the house, 11 South Glenwood. Those were his gifts. And so he got up on a ladder and he began filling the pantyhose with those coffee mugs. And so they stretched all the way down to the ground. And then he took the metal plate saying 11 South Glenwood and stuck it right in the seat of the pantyhose. But he liked those April Fool jokes. And one year on April Fool's Day, Mom was giving a speech at a conference in Italy. And at that time, they would communicate mostly by fax. Remember Mom's fax machine? And so he, on April Fool's Day, said to me, let's send your mom a fax. Okay. but it's got to be from you. Okay. And we sat down and he started writing, and this is kind of how it came out. Dear Mom, it was supposed to be from me. Everything's going well here. Hope your conference is going well and you're having a good time. A little bit of news, the new bushes you planted in the yard are looking good. Other news, Beth and Ron have decided to get married. We've been together 29 years, we're still not married, but hey, we're doing well. At any rate, Beth and Ron have decided to get married. Good news. Also, someone from the English department dropped by, and we had a good visit. I should tell you that a friend of mine has a litter of 8 new beagle puppies and can't find a home for them. Now, I know we already have 2 beagle dogs, Belle and Danny, but I thought we should welcome these puppies because where are they going to go? So I put their beds in the living room. Now, you know that couch, it needed reupholstering anyway. But you might need to take it to the finishing touch because the leg is getting a little bad. Dad said he was worried, because I'm writing this letter. Let's see, what am I saying? Oh, Dad said he was a little worried that it might tear up the furniture, so he has moved the puppies' beds to your office, where he said they can't get into much trouble. Hope your speech goes well. Oh, by the way, Dad said to tell you the Cedar Creek farm is looking beautiful, and he stopped by to see the Graces. Wynn is doing well. She was a little perturbed, though, because Leela and Ellie had run off with a motorcycle gang. Good luck on your speech. Dad is here beside me as I write this and sends his love. Love, Beth. He was mischievous. He was also a great supporter of all of us. If we were having trouble, he'd write us some letters, give us a call, leave every night messages on my answering machine. And one year, 1989, I was having a rough year. I was living up in Chicago. I didn't have a good place to live. I was recently divorced. My health was bad. And Dad called and said he was coming to Chicago to visit me. I think actually he was sent by the great delegator, my mother, who was working in Texas at the time. And so he came up and he didn't really know what to do. He said, well, what can I do? I said, well, Dad, you know, I'm making my living now as a storyteller, and I was wondering if you could just tell me some stories. I have some questions to ask you about specific ancestors. And so we sat down in the Blind Faith Cafe in Evanston, Illinois, for the entire day. And I had yellow sheets, was asking Dad specific questions, and no matter what I said, he would immediately begin speaking. He could speak and speak. He would just immediately have the answer. In fact, a few years ago, after we buried my mom, we have on the back of her gravestone something that she said, Winifred Bryan Horner to her successors, embrace life. A few years ago, I said to Dad, what would you like on the back of your gravestone? I mean, I know it's going to be a lot of years, but, you know, it would be nice for us to know what you'd like on the back of your gravestone. He said, oh, you know, Bethy Beth, I don't really say much. I said, right. What we're going to have to do is we're going to fill up the whole stone, have an asterisk that says, see the next 3 stones. At any rate, I would ask him questions such as, now, is William Lynn Scott your great-great-great-grandfather? Is David Lynn Scott his father? Just trying to get things straight. Yeah, he was the one who they mutinied against him and they didn't know. Anyway, that's the kind of ancestors we have. They were mutinied against. And then, now, was it when Wesley Winans was killed, which Civil War battle was that? And then I asked, remember that funeral you went to once down by Hartsburg? Remember there was a guy who sat next to you who started getting into an argument with the preacher about the character of the deceased? And that started him on a whole series of stories of disastrous funerals he had attended in Boone County. Now, I have to tell you, my father is a master of understatement. And I would study him. In fact, I was recording this session as he told me stories because I'm not very good at understatement, but he was excellent at understatement. In fact, I found in going through his things a list that he wrote in 1989, things I like to do or would like to work toward. Number one, of course, was I like being part of a community, particularly county government. But number 7, he said, I am not all that fond of not having money. Master of understatement. After my senior year of high school, I had a group of friends, 2 of whom are here today, and we went out every night. They would come over to my house, or I'd go over to their house, and we were so innocent, you all. We were members of the speech and drama team, wow, we were wild. Unlike my older brother and sister, who really did a good job with their teenagehood and had a lot of fun. But we went out every night, and I'd get in late, and then I'd sleep really late the next day. And my mother, being an academician, took the academic approach toward this problem with repeated and prolonged lecturing to me. But the academic approach had no effect whatsoever. Well, one morning, slipping in a little past dawn and up into my bed, thinking my parents wouldn't notice, I heard my mother taking the academic approach with my father in the next room. Dave, I heard, do something. Your daughter is staying out all night, sleeping all day. It's shameful. A few minutes later, there was a light tap at my bedroom door. And Dad opened up the door, straightening his tie. He was getting ready to go to work. And just sort of spoke into the air of the bedroom. Some people, he said, have found it useful to be asleep at night and awake during the day. Click. That's all I ever heard. I can't read my notes. Some people. So, any rate, back to the Blind Faith Cafe. Story after story of disasters, funerals, odd characters in Boone County. And by the end of the day, I looked down at my notes, and I saw that at least 3/4 of these stories he told me had begun with, "You can never tell this to anyone." I have an entire cassette of stories from Dad saying, you can never tell this. And it's so hard. I mean, and of course, you want to hear those stories, right? I don't think anybody was in those stories here that's present. Anyway, maybe 1 or 2. But anyway, they were amazingly funny stories, well told. They were heartbreaking stories of people in Boone County, but I have kept to my word, and I've kept them to myself. But maybe after a chocolate martini. Anyway, that safety deposit box, that cassette became so important to me. That safety box, it's coming up, I promise. That cassette became so important to me, and I didn't have a real solid place to live at the time, that I carried it in my purse to keep it safe. And one day I got worried. What if something happens to my purse? What if I leave it somewhere? So I opened a safety deposit box, and I put it in there. And the very next night, I was at a stoplight in Chicago and had a smash and grab where someone smashed through my window and grabbed my purse. But the cassette was safe. Dad's stories were safe. I am amazed now, thinking of my father, of all that he juggled. He juggled so much. He just wanted to be a farmer. But here came World War II. And then here came 4 children. And then here came him needing to finish his degree, which had been interrupted by World War II. And here came my mom saying, I've tried it in the country for 14 years. I think I'll try it in town now. And off we went to move into town. And so living in town, working at the farm, going back and forth, already a drought had made it necessary for him to take a job at the Weather Bureau. The shifts that began at 3 in the morning that he had to get to. The farm, the Weather Bureau, kids in town, going to every possible theater production I did in high school. dragging drum sets around the whole county, using the house on Glenwood as a spot for Wynn's School of Creative Drama, dragging those flats all over town, I remember. Just so all of the children. How did he do that? I don't know. I don't know how he did it all. And always, always community service. Back and forth, doing it all. He said he never got much sleep because the shifts at the Weather Bureau were so odd. He never got much sleep. He remembers falling into bed who knows, midday, midnight, who knows. And he was so hungry when he got home from the Weather Bureau and then went out to do some things with the cows that he put a hunk of cheese in and started chewing. And he woke up the next, morning or night. The cheese had just kind of dissolved. I mean, he hadn't even had a chance. We kids, we slept up in the attic of the farmhouse. And whenever we would come down to go to the bathroom or anything like that, we didn't want to go back upstairs. And we would just crawl into bed with Dad. He said it was a challenge every night just to find a dry place. He had no trouble sleeping. Now, later in his life, he got a little more sleep. He had a little more trouble falling asleep, but he had a method, and that was to do complex mathematical problems in his head. Usually geometry, that was his favorite, or to think about the song, The 12 Days of Christmas. And if you had 8 milking maids that many days in a row, and those lords of leaping so many days in a row, there would be so many lords of leaping. How many would there be? And how many milking maids? And maybe you would need to open a birthing clinic and, open a chapel or something like that. And he mapped it all out. He loved planning parties, and he would figure out the dimensions of a room. How many round tables could fit into that room if he decided to have 8 people at each table? How many serving settings would he need? Any kind of mathematical problem. That's how he put himself to sleep. Mom wrote one year in her Christmas letter, well, we celebrated our 50th this year. 50 years ago, Dave said to me, hey, down at Water Oaks, of course, let's grow old together. And this year, after 50 years, he said, well, we did that. Now what are we going to do? Mom was, and you must know Dad as a great supporter of Mom and her career. But guess what? It didn't start out that way because he was so devoted to farming. When they moved out of their house on Tremont Court and into the wonderful Tiger Place, I went through a lot of their belongings. And here was a box marked Winnie's Writing, a whole wall in the basement marked Winnie's Writing, 1930s to 1960s. And Mom said, I'll just throw that away. Pfft. I'm a former librarian and a storyteller, no way. And I found a box of telegrams that had been written to Mom after she had published an article in the Saturday Evening Post in 1956, the title of which was, How Long Can We Stay on the Farm? And it was, financially, how long can family farmers exist? In that box, there were telegrams from all over the United States, including from Dwight Eisenhower, who was then President of the United States, and one from someone in the Canadian Parliament asking Mom to come to the Canadian Parliament and speak about family farming in the United States. I thought, wow. I took this to Mom. Dad was sitting in his easy chair reading the paper. Mom and I would do crosswords at night. We were doing this, but I came in and said, hey, Mom, look at this telegram. Did you speak to the Canadian Parliament? No. Your father put the kibosh on that. And from behind the newspaper came this voice. That was before I got liberated. And as you know, he did get liberated and was a great supporter of women in almost any profession, Okay. Mom and Dad always said we were a good team. We were a really good team. And I think as parents, they were a good team. And as they got older, they developed a language that was something I didn't understand at the time. But as I get older, I'm starting to understand. And being around people at the Tiger Place who are in their 90s, certainly understand. I understand now. I overheard a conversation. I was helping them with a project in their basement. And I came up the stairs, and they were in the middle of this conversation. And I heard my dad say to Mom, "I don't know, Winnie. He was just out in his yard raking his leaves, and he just fell over dead." And Mom replied, "That is so great." Now, I was taken aback, but Dad responded right away. "Yeah," he said, "I hope someday I'm just out at the farm and I just fall over dead." And Mom said, "We all hope that for you, Dave." Said, of course, with the greatest of love, that he would suddenly die where he loved to be. He did not want to linger. No one wants to linger. Well, Dad didn't go quite that fast, and not at the farm. But when I informed him that the doctor had said he had maybe weeks to live, there was hardly any, just started talking like he always did. He said, "Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to wind this thing up." He said, "The only thing is I don't want to be in pain. I want to go fast, and I don't want to scare small children. So if you bring the great-grandchildren here, make sure they're okay." So he did go fast, just a few weeks or about 10 days, faster than any of us wanted. But we got a chance to say goodbye to him, and we sang to him and told stories, and I took him on a guided imagery all over the farm in a horse and buggy with all his favorite people so he could go out with that memory. Still too fast. I'm really grateful for his long life and feel very grateful. I'm grateful for all of his friends and family who supported him and cared for him. I'm grateful for my brother Richard's videos of all the interviews that he's done with Dad. I'm grateful for all the letters that my father has written, so we have all of this writing of him. But it's upsetting now not to be able to ask him questions. And Ann and I, my cousin Ann and I, were talking about that this morning. I say, "Dad," I was thinking the other morning, "Dad, what was it that your great-grandmother Jane Harper, when she came to Boone County right after the Civil War, and she met Mrs. Nifong in the house in this park, what was it that she said after meeting Mrs. Nifong? Or was it a Mrs. Nifong's ancestor? What was the generation there, Dad? What was it that Jane Harper said?" Remember, it was like an understatement. It was really wry. I can't remember what he told me. Or, "Dad, remember that story you told me about that Boone County character who got up one morning, who slept in the nude, and he got up one morning and decided to vacuum his mattress? And he got a significant part of his body stuck in the vacuum?" "Dad, I can't remember that guy's name." "Dad, what was it like the first day of New Haven School with black and white kids going to the same school here in Boone County?" It just makes me sad. But I'm grateful for the time that we did have. I'm grateful for his love of cows. I'm grateful for his love of Mom. I'm grateful for his love of all of us here, for his friends and for his community and for their love. He left us with so many good stories. He expressed them in so many interesting ways, stories and his love, in letters when we needed help, and even in his famous whole wheat biscuit recipe that he wrote out for us in 2018. He was famous amongst the family and some friends of making whole wheat biscuits for us, cinnamon biscuits when we were little kids. At the end of the recipe, which he has written out, he says, "You must do this simple process with affection for the persons who are to be the intended consumers. So Dad, Dada, Dada Dave, Uncle Dave, Commissioner Horner, friend Dave, boy, you done good. Thank you.
I want to share with you something that I found in one of my divinity school textbooks over 40 years ago. The dead, whose life in this world has been completed, speak with a force that those who are still here, with potential and possibility in front of them, cannot achieve. Of the dead, we know a whole story, the beginning and the ending. The story of the living is as yet incomplete. Therefore, we remember the departed and listen to their testimony, especially those who witnessed the goodness of life and did it exemplary. By the wholeness of their life and by their example, they can instruct and encourage us, those of us whose work is not yet done. May we remember David Horner. Again, thank you all for being here and for being all that you are and mean to the Horner family. After the final song, there will be a reception in the art gallery. We'd ask that you we'd appreciate it if you would wear your masks inside. You may stay in there or come back out here. And please notice the incredible display that Meryl put together. Thank you.
Thanks for everything, Paula, and all of you for being here. Okay, on the top of every list of dads was the song "What a Wonderful World," and at one point, the family members submitted various verses, and I hope the family members have some copies of the verses and will sing out, because what I want you to do, it's very confusing in the program, and Beth and I were up late at night writing the instructions, which apparently still, after many edits, didn't. Yeah. Thank you. So we're going to sing a couple of little verses about Dad after we sing the first four that are in the program. So you have to sing with us for those. And we're going to sing 3 verses. And all of this is going to be led by Leela. On recorded video. So those of you on the live stream will just see Leela singing. You will miss this wonderful thing, but you can come back and see it recorded later, and all of you can see it recorded too. So, are we ready?
Do we have the words in your program?
You have the words in your
Okay.
program, except for the 3.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see rivers of blue and dang horse flies, shifting gravel bars and dark starry nights. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Working toward New Haven School, Planned Parenthood too, County Commission, he works for me and you. And don't forget the cemetery board, 43 years old, Lord, oh Lord. But in the garage hides gooseberry pie, safe and away from the kids' hungry eyes. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Louis Armstrong.
All right. The program is over. Go get some goodies, and thank you for being here.
Share your own memories of Dad.